They whispered behind my back about my clothes until I showed them my fashion line on Vogue. The whispers started in middle school. Not the subtle kind that dissolve into the background, but the kind that were meant to be heard, meant to cut. What is Elowen even wearing? Did she make that from her grandma's curtains? God, she looks like a thrift store threw up on her. I was 12 when I first realized that my love for mismatched patterns and unconventional silhouettes made me a target. While Marisol and her friends coordinated their mall-bought outfits with military precision, I was layering vintage kimono jackets over hand-painted tees and pairing them with my father's old neckties as belts. My mother, Vivienne, a former art teacher-turned-administrator, had always encouraged my unique eye, as she called it. She'd thrift with me on weekends, helping me hunt for pieces nobody else would appreciate. "Fashion is art you live in," she'd say, sifting through racks of discarded clothes. But even her support couldn't shield me from the social crucifixion that awaited me every morning at Lincoln Heights Middle School. By high school, the whispers had evolved into a background radiation I'd learned to live with. My cousin Zara, who lived with us after her parents moved abroad for work, would sometimes try to help. Ella, maybe just for picture day, something more normal, she'd suggest, holding up a painfully plain blouse she'd bought me as a gift. I loved Zara. She was more sister than cousin, but her attempts to help only reinforced what everyone else was saying. I was a problem that needed fixing. The thing is, I didn't want fixing. Deep down, beneath the hurt, I knew my clothes weren't the problem. They were my voice when I couldn't find words. They were how I processed the chaos of growing up with a father who left when I was 8, telling me I was too much for him too. They were how I reclaimed control when I felt I had none. But high school is a battleground, and I was losing the war. Not just with my peers, but with my family, who'd begun to split into factions. My mother remained my tireless champion. My Uncle Nico, who'd moved in to help after Dad left, would defend me to others but quietly suggest I tone it down when we were alone. And Zara, despite her good intentions, increasingly sided with my critics as she rose through the school's social ranks. Things came to a head the night of junior prom. I'd spent months designing and sewing my dress, a structured black bodice with a skirt made from hundreds of origami birds I'd folded from vintage fashion magazines. It was painstaking work, each bird symbolizing a whisper I'd survived, transformed into something beautiful. The night of the dance, I descended our stairs to find my date, Reese, waiting with my family. Reese was new, an exchange student from Wales with a quiet confidence I admired. He'd asked me to prom precisely because I wasn't like everyone else, he'd said. I'll never forget his face when he saw me, pure admiration. And I'll never forget what happened next. "Oh God, Elle," Zara whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You can't seriously be wearing that. It looks like you skinned Big Bird." The room fell silent. My uncle barely concealed a snort of laughter. My mother's face tightened with disapproval, not at me, but at them. But it was Reese who spoke. "Actually," he said, his accent thickening with emotion, "I think she looks revolutionary." That word, revolutionary, it changed something in me. Because in that moment, I realized that's exactly what I was trying to do. Revolt. Against the whispers, against the pressure to conform, against every person who'd tried to make me smaller, duller, more palatable. I went to prom. I danced all night in my bird dress, and I decided that someday I'd make them all eat their whispers. College. Acceptance letters arrived like a cavalry rescuing me from the battlefield of high school. I chose Westlake Institute of Design, 3,000 blessed miles from home. My mother cried when we packed my things, part pride, part fear of empty. Nesting. Uncle Nico made awkward jokes about me coming home with tattoos and blue hair. Zara, now preparing for her senior year, seemed almost wistful as she helped fold my clothes. "You'll fit in there," she said, running her fingers over one of my hand-embroidered jackets. I couldn't tell if she meant it as a compliment or a dig. Dean Samus Nakhanins. Irony wasn't lost on me that the very things that had made me an outcast at home were what had gotten me accepted to one of the country's most prestigious design schools. My portfolio, filled with sketches of impossible garments and photos of my own handmade clothes, had earned me not just admission, but a partial scholarship. Westlake was everything I'd hoped for. a place where creativity wasn't just accepted, but expected. My roommate, Juniper, had hair dyed the color of sunset and wore vintage men's suits with combat boots. My professor, Dr. Renata Kovic, was a Slovenian textile artist whose first words to our class were, "If you are not uncomfortable, you are not creating." For the first time, I felt seen, not just tolerated, but celebrated. I video called home weekly, showing my mother my projects, enduring Uncle Nico's comments about those artsy types, and Zara's updates about her senior year triumphs. I was trying, really trying, to maintain connections despite the distance. But with each call, I felt the gap widening. "You're dressing differently," my mother observed during one call, her voice careful. "More sophisticated." It was true. Being surrounded by other designers had refined my aesthetic. I still loved my patterns and textures, but I'd learned about proportion, about intention, about the difference between chaotic and controlled disruption. My clothes were still unmistakably mine, but they'd evolved. "It's called growth, Mom," I said, trying not to sound defensive. During my sophomore year, I interned with Meera Patel, an up-and-coming designer known for her sustainable practices and architectural silhouettes. She took me under her wing, showing me not just how to design, but how to navigate the cutthroat business of fashion. I worked punishing hours, surviving on coffee and determination, soaking up everything she taught me. "You have a perspective," she told me one evening as we worked late, pinning a muslin mock-up. "Most designers your age are just copying what they think fashion should be. You're creating what it could be." I carried those words with me like a talisman, especially during holiday breaks when I'd return home to find nothing had changed. The whispers at family gatherings weren't about my clothes anymore. They were about my fancy art school, my impractical career choice, my phase that surely would end when reality set in. Thanksgiving of my junior year was particularly brutal. Zara, now at State University studying business, brought her new boyfriend, Declan, a finance major with expensive taste and cheaply earned opinions. "So you just make clothes?" he asked over dinner, twirling his fork like he was addressing a child. "Isn't that what factories in China are for?" "Ella doesn't just make clothes," my mother interjected. "She's a designer. She's creating wearable art." "Right," Declan smirked. "Very practical in this economy." What happened next surprised even me. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I calmly set down my fork and said, "Actually, Declan, I just received an offer to showcase my junior collection at the Young Designers Showcase in New York this spring. Buyers from major retailers will be there, and my sustainable manufacturing model actually eliminates the exploitation you seem so comfortable with." The table fell silent. Uncle Nico stared at his plate. Zara looked like she'd swallowed something. Sour. My mother's eyes shone with tears of pride. That night, as I packed to return to school early, Zara appeared in my doorway. "I didn't know about the showcase," she said softly. That's amazing, Ella." "Would it have mattered?" I asked, not looking up from my suitcase. "Would you have defended me?" She had no answer. And in her silence, I found mine. I was done carrying the weight of their doubts, done trying to make myself smaller to make them comfortable. I returned to school with a new fire. My junior collection would be my declaration of independence. The Young Designers Showcase became my obsession. While my classmates partied on weekends, I haunted the studios, drafting patterns, sourcing sustainable fabrics, experimenting with natural dyes made from food waste. My collection, which I titled Whispers, incorporated actual text, the cruel words I'd endured, hand-embroidered in barely visible thread that caught the light only when the garments moved. Dr. Kovic worried about me. "Passion is fuel, Elowen," she said, finding me asleep at my workstation one morning. "But you must not let it consume you." But I was beyond caution. The showcase wasn't just an opportunity, it was vindication. Every stitch was a rebuttal to those who doubted me, every design a middle finger to the whispers that had followed. Me for years. Juniper became my reluctant assistant, bringing me meals when I forgot to eat, forcing me to shower when I'd worked for days straight. "Your genius will mean nothing if you're dead from exhaustion," she'd say, physically pushing me toward our dorm. 2 weeks before the showcase, disaster struck. A pipe burst in the studio, flooding the space where my nearly completed collection hung. I arrived to find my work soaked, some pieces stained beyond repair, months of work destroyed in hours. I called my mother, sobbing so hard she could barely understand me. "I can't do it," I kept repeating. "It's over." "Listen to me," she said firmly. "You are Elowen Cassia Merritt. You made a dress from origami birds when you were 17. You will figure this out." "But there's no time." "Then I'm coming to you," she decided. "I'll be on the next flight," I protested, but secretly I was desperate for her help. And not just her emotional support. My mother was a skilled seamstress who had taught me everything I knew before college. She arrived the next day, suitcase in hand, looking small and out of place among the avant-garde students of Westlake. But when I brought her to the damaged collection, her expression changed from hesitant tourist to general surveying a battlefield. "We can salvage this," she said, examining a soaked silk jacket. "The water stains, we can overdye everything. Make it part of the design." For the next 12 days, we barely slept. My mother, Juniper, and even Dr. Kovich joined forces to resurrect my collection. We overdyed the garments with indigo, creating a gradient that made the water damage look intentional. We reinforced weakened seams, reimagined pieces that were beyond saving, and somehow, through sheer determination and countless cups of coffee, completed the collection with hours to spare. The night of the showcase, as models were being dressed in my designs, my phone buzzed with a text from Zara. "Watching your live stream. We're all here. Good luck." Attached was a photo of my family gathered around a laptop. Uncle Nico, Zara, even Declan, looking uncomfortable, but present. My mother, of course, was with me backstage, steaming last-minute wrinkles from a silk blouse. "They're watching," I told her, showing the text. She smiled, but there was caution in her eyes. "Is that what you want? Their approval?" The question struck me like a physical blow. Was it? Had all this work, all this passion, been about proving something to people who'd never truly seen me? No, I realized aloud. I want them to see me. That's different. The showcase was a blur of lights, music, and nervous energy. I watched from backstage as my collection, my heart externalized in fabric and thread, moved down the runway. The overdyed indigo pieces shifted like midnight water, the embroidered whispers catching light as the models walked. The final piece, a coat made entirely of hand-woven textile scraps that would have otherwise been discarded, received audible gasps from the audience. When it was over, when I stepped out for my bow, the applause was deafening, but it wasn't the ovation that moved me to tears. It was the realization that I'd created something true, not for them, not for revenge, but for myself. The validation I'd sought for so long had finally come from within. Dr. Kovich embraced me backstage. "You found your voice," she said. "Now, the real work begins." My phone was flooded with texts and calls, from classmates, from my family, from industry people. But the most important message came from Oliva Reichman, editor at Vogue, who wanted to feature my collection in their Designers to Watch segment. My mother and I celebrated with cheap champagne in my dorm room that night, both of us too exhausted to go to the official after-party. As we sat cross-legged on my bed, she asked, "Are you going to tell them about Vogue?" I considered this, sipping my champagne. No, I decided. Not yet. Some victories were too precious to share with those who hadn't believed in the fight. Senior year passed in a whirlwind. The Vogue feature opened doors I hadn't even known existed. I was offered an apprenticeship with Hélène Devereaux, the reclusive French designer whose sustainable practices had revolutionized haute couture. Between completing my degree and preparing for Paris, I hardly had time to think about home. I returned, only once for Christmas, to find the dynamics had shifted. Uncle Nico, who'd always dismissed my fashion hobby, now boasted to neighbors about my success. Zara, finishing her business degree, suddenly had questions about the industry, and, strangest of all, was the absence of whispers. They'd been replaced by something almost worse, performative pride. "We always knew you'd make it," Aunt Petra said at dinner, though she'd been one of the most vocal critics of my choices. "You were always such a creative child. I let the revisionist history slide, too exhausted to confront it." But when I overheard Zara telling a friend on the phone that she'd always supported my unique style, something in me snapped. I found her in the kitchen later that night, raiding the refrigerator. "You know what hurts more than the whispers?" I asked, startling her. Pretending they never happened, she closed the fridge, her expression guarded. "What do you want me to say, Elle? That I was a terrible cousin? That I joined in when people mocked you? Fine. I did. I was insecure and stupid. I don't want your confession, I said, surprised by my own calmness. I want you to stop rewriting history. You didn't support me. None of you did, except Mom. And that's okay. I don't need you to be my cheerleaders now, but I won't let you pretend the past was different than it was. So what? You're just going to hold a grudge forever, now that you're some big shot designer? I'm not holding a grudge. I'm holding a boundary. The phrase had come from my therapist, a gift to myself after the showcase. When I realized success hadn't healed the wounds I'd been carrying, Dr. Faisal had helped me understand that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and that I could love my family without accepting their narrative. Zara looked at me like I'd started speaking another language. Maybe I had. Paris was both everything and nothing like I'd imagined. Helene's atelier was not the glamorous studio of my dreams, but a converted warehouse on the outskirts of the city, filled with serious-faced artisans who viewed my Vogue feature with skepticism rather than admiration. Helene herself was a severe woman who spoke little and criticized much. "Your work has potential," she told me on my first day, examining my portfolio with clinical detachment. "But it is emotional, too personal. Fashion is not therapy, Ms. Merritt." I wanted to argue, wanted to explain that the personal was what made my work meaningful, but I bit my tongue. I was here to learn, not to defend my process. The work was grueling. 16-hour days, constant criticism, the pressure to abandon my own aesthetic in favor of Helene's minimalist vision. I lived in a tiny apartment with 3 other apprentices, all of us too exhausted to explore the city we'd dreamed of. My weekly calls with my mother became my lifeline. She'd listen as I vented about Helene's impossible standards, about my homesickness, about my fear that I was losing myself in the process of becoming the designer I thought I wanted to be. "Maybe this isn't right for me," I confessed one night, 6 months into my apprenticeship. "Maybe I should come home." "You could," she said, "or you could remember why you're there in the first place. To learn from the best." "No, to become the best version of yourself. If that's not happening with Helene, then find another way. But don't come home because it's hard. Come home because you've found what you're looking for." Her words stayed with me as I entered the atelier the next day. Helene was presenting her vision for the upcoming collection. Sustainable, yes, but safe. Predictable. The opposite of everything I believed fashion could be. During the presentation, I sketched quietly in my notebook, not her designs, but my own. A response to her collection that honored her principles but infused them with the emotional resonance she dismissed. Afterward, as we dispersed to our workstations, she stopped by my desk and saw my sketches. I braced for criticism, but she surprised me. "This," she said, tapping one sketch, "has integrity. The rest are derivative, but this is yours." It wasn't quite praise, but it was acknowledgement. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't need Helene to validate my vision. I needed her to help me refine it. Over the next year, our relationship evolved. She remained critical, but I learned to distinguish between critique of technique and critique of voice. I absorbed her knowledge of construction, of materials, of the business, while holding firm to my own aesthetic. When my apprenticeship ended, she offered me a junior designer position. "You still have much to learn," she said, "but perhaps I have something to learn from you as well." I declined. It was time to forge my own path. Returning to America felt like stepping into a parallel universe. Everything looked the same, but felt different. Or perhaps I was the one who had changed. I spent a month with my mother, now retired and pursuing her own art more seriously. We converted the garage into a studio space where I began drafting patterns for what would become my first independent collection. "You could stay," she suggested one evening as we shared wine on the porch. "Set up your business here?" Part of me was tempted. The familiarity of home, the support of having her nearby. It was appealing after the isolation of Paris. But another part knew I needed to stand completely on my own. "I need to be in New York," I told her. "That's where I'll find my market, my manufacturers, my people." She nodded, understanding. "Just don't forget who your first people were." I found a tiny apartment in Brooklyn and an even tinier studio space that I shared with 2 other designers, Vivek, who created sculptural knitwear, and Doris, whose futuristic 3D printed accessories had developed a cult following. We formed an unlikely family, pooling resources, sharing contacts, critiquing each other's work with brutal honesty and unwavering support. The first year was harder than I'd imagined. Despite my training, despite the Vogue feature that now felt like ancient history, breaking into the New York fashion scene as an independent designer was nearly impossible. I took freelance design jobs to pay rent, created custom pieces for private clients, and worked every connection I had. My family's reactions to my struggle varied. My mother sent care packages and encouragement. Uncle Nico forwarded job listings for corporate design positions. Just until you get established, he'd say, not understanding that taking such jobs would mean abandoning my vision entirely. Zara, now working for a marketing firm and engaged to Declan, sent a surprising text. Have you considered crowdfunding? I could help with the campaign. I was skeptical. Our relationship had remained strained since our confrontation years ago, but desperation makes strange bedfellows, and Zara's marketing expertise was exactly what I needed. We began working together remotely, me designing, her crafting the narrative. That would sell not just my clothes, but my story. To my surprise, she was good, really good. She understood how to position my work in a crowded market, how to highlight the sustainable aspects without being preachy, how to make my personal journey resonate with potential backers. Why are you doing this? I asked during one of our video calls. You don't owe me anything. She was quiet for a moment. Maybe I'm trying to be the person I should have been back then. Or maybe I just think your work deserves to be seen. Our campaign launched on a Tuesday. By Friday, we'd reached 200% of our funding goal. By the end of the month, I had enough capital to produce a small collection and stage a modest presentation during New York Fashion Week. The reality of having actual funding was both exhilarating and terrifying. Suddenly, I wasn't just creating for myself. I had backers, expectations, deadlines. I threw myself into production, working with local manufacturers, sourcing dead stock fabrics, ensuring every piece reflected both my aesthetic and my ethics. The night before my presentation, my phone rang. It was Zara. I'm outside your building, she said. I brought reinforcements. I went downstairs to find not just Zara but my mother as well, both looking travel-worn but determined. What are you doing here? I asked, embracing them both. You didn't think we'd miss your big moment, did you? My mother said. Declan's handling the social media from home, Zara added. I'm here for the hands-on stuff. Put us to work. And work we did. Through the night, the three of us steamed garments, made last-minute adjustments, prepared the space. As dawn broke, we stood surveying our efforts. The small gallery transformed into a presentation space, my collection displayed on mannequins, and ready for the live models who would arrive in hours. It's beautiful, Ella, my mother said, her voice catching. It's exactly who you are. The presentation wasn't large or flashy. I couldn't compete with established designers' runway shows, but it was impactful. Fashion editors, influencers, and buyers moved through the space, examining the craftsmanship up close, asking questions about my sustainable practices, taking notes and photos. I watched from a corner as Zara confidently networked, directing people to specific pieces, explaining my process. She caught my eye across the room and gave me a subtle thumbs up. In that moment, something shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but a new understanding. As the event wound down, a woman approached me, tall, immaculately dressed, with a shrewd gaze that seemed to look through rather than at me. Olivia Reichman, she introduced herself. We featured your student work a few years ago. I remember, I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. That opportunity meant everything to me. And what you've done with it is remarkable, she said, gesturing to the collection. We'd like to do a follow-up piece, from student to sensation. Would you be interested? Would I be interested? In another Vogue feature, this time focused entirely on my professional work? I managed a nod, not trusting my voice. Excellent, she said, handing me her card. Have your people call my people. As she walked away, my mother appeared at my side. What was that about? I turned to her, my professional composure crumbling into pure, childlike excitement. Mom, I whispered, I think I just became my people. Vogue wants me to expand the collection for the feature. I told Vivek and Doris over takeout in our shared studio. They want to shoot it in Portugal at this abandoned modernist hotel. It's incredible, but you're freaking out because your current production capacity is maxed out and you don't have the capital for expansion. Dorisk finished for me, reaching for another spring roll. I nodded miserably. The Vogue opportunity was a dream, but the timing was impossible. My initial collection had sold well to boutiques, but I'd reinvested every penny into the business. Expanding would require more funds than I had access to. Have you considered investors? Vivek asked. I know a few angels who are into sustainable fashion. The thought made my stomach clench. After fighting so hard for my independence, the idea of answering to investors felt like failure. Actually, I said slowly, I had another idea, but it's complicated. The next morning, I called Zara. Our relationship had warmed since the presentation, but what I was about to propose went beyond family reconciliation. This was business. I need a partner, I said when she answered. Someone who understands marketing, finances, the business side, someone I can trust. She was silent for so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm offering you 30% of Elo and Merit Designs if you come on as my business partner. Full time. It would mean leaving your job, moving to New York. Ella, this is huge. I need to think about it. Talk to Declan. Of course, I said, trying to mask my disappointment. Take your time, she called back that night. Declan thinks I'm insane, she said without preamble. Leaving a stable job for a startup fashion brand? My heart sank. I understand. I told him he was right, she continued. It is insane. But you know what? I'm doing it anyway. 3 weeks? Later, Zara moved into my spare bedroom. Just until I find my own place, she insisted, and we began the process of becoming business partners. The transition wasn't smooth. Years of complicated history didn't disappear overnight, and our working styles couldn't have been more different. I was chaotic creativity. She was structured strategy. I designed on instinct. She decided based on data. Our first major fight came when she suggested we needed to elevate the price point of certain pieces. These pieces take hours to craft. I argued, they're already priced fairly for the work involved. But the market perception, I don't care about market perception. I care about people being able to afford sustainable fashion. She threw up her hands. This is exactly why you need me, Elle. You can't build a sustainable business on idealism alone. We glared at each other across the studio, at an impasse. Then, slowly, her expression softened. What if, she suggested, we create a diffusion line? Keep your main collection at current price points, but add a premium line for the pieces that truly warrant it? It was a compromise that respected both our positions, and the first of many such negotiations as we prepared for the Vogue shoot. The day we flew to Portugal, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu, of coming full circle. Years ago, I'd been the awkward teen in handmade clothes, desperate for validation. Now I was flying across the ocean to see my designs featured in the magazine that had once been my Bible. The shoot location was breathtaking, a concrete masterpiece abandoned in the 1970s, now reclaimed by nature. Vines climbed the walls, sunlight streamed through broken windows, creating the perfect backdrop for my collection's juxtaposition of structure and fluidity. As the models were being dressed, Olivia approached me. "We're thinking of putting you on the cover," she said casually, as if she hadn't just offered me the fashion equivalent of a Nobel Prize. With your story, the outsider who became the insider while staying true to her vision, it's exactly what the industry needs right now. I tried to respond professionally, but the emotion overwhelmed me. Seeing my expression, she softened slightly. "Fashion is built on transformation," she said. "Personal and professional. You've managed both with grace." The shoot wrapped after 3 exhausting days. Before we left, the photographer pulled me aside to show me some of the raw images on his camera. Seeing my designs in that setting, on those models, through his lens, it was like seeing my work for the first time. My vision fully realized. Zara and I celebrated with cheap wine on the hotel balcony that night, watching the sunset over the Atlantic. "Remember when they used to whisper about your clothes?" she asked, refilling our glasses. "How could I forget?" "Did she make that from her grandma's curtains?" I mimicked. She winced. "I was awful." You were a kid, I said, surprising. Myself, with how easily the forgiveness came, we all were. Still, I should have stood up for you. And I should have stood up for myself sooner, I countered. But here's the thing about fashion, Zara. It's always about the next collection, the next creation. You can't move forward if you're always looking back, she raised her glass. To moving forward, then, partners. Partners, I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. As we flew home the next day, I scrolled through the photos on my phone, behind-the-scenes shots from the shoot, selfies with the team, the concrete and glass backdrop that had showcased my vision so perfectly. In one image, I caught my reflection in a broken window. Designer, businesswoman, survivor of 1,000 whispers. If I could tell my 12-year-old self anything, it would be this. The whispers don't stop. They just change. And eventually, if you listen to your own voice long enough, they become irrelevant. The issue hit newsstands on a rainy Tuesday in October. Zara had arranged for copies to be delivered to our studio at midnight, and we'd waited, up like children on Christmas Eve, too excited to sleep. When the delivery arrived, we stared at the stack of magazines for a full minute before either of us had the courage to look. There I was, on the cover of Vogue. Not my clothes, me. Standing amid the ruins of the Portuguese hotel, wearing a piece from my collection, looking directly into the camera with a confidence I'd earned through years of doubt. Elowen Merritt, fashion's sustainable revolutionary, the headline declared. We spent the night passing the magazine back and forth, reading. And rereading the article, which traced my journey from bullied teenager to Paris apprentice to independent designer. The piece was honest about the challenges I'd faced, both personal and professional, while celebrating the unique vision that had driven me forward. By morning, my phone was exploding with notifications. Orders flooded our website. Interview requests piled up. Retailers who'd previously ignored us were suddenly desperate to stock the collection. We need to scale carefully, Zara cautioned as we tried to process the overnight transformation of our business. Sustainable growth is still growth. She was right, of course, but amid the practical considerations, I couldn't help but feel a childish urge to share my triumph with everyone who'd ever doubted me, everyone who'd whispered. I texted my mother first, simply, "Have you seen it?" Her response came minutes later. A photo of her at the local bookstore, buying every copy they had, her face radiating pride. I hesitated before sending the next text. To Uncle Nico, to Zara's parents overseas, to former classmates who'd reached out over the years with transparent attempts to capitalize on my rising profile. Did I really need their validation now? Zara found me staring at my phone. Having second thoughts about the mass gloat, she asked, perceptive as always. Is it petty if I want them to see? To really see? She considered this. Maybe a little. But you've earned petty. And honestly, they should see what you've built. So, I did it. Not with a text, but with something more permanent. I had copies of the magazine sent to everyone who'd ever whispered. Family members, former classmates, teachers who dismissed my ambitions. Not with a note, not with a demand for acknowledgement, but simply as a statement of fact. This is who I am. This is what I built. Despite you. Because of you. The responses varied. Some sent gushing congratulations that felt hollow given our history. Others maintained a telling silence. My third-grade art teacher, who'd once told me I lacked the discipline for a creative career, sent a handwritten note of genuine apology and admiration. Uncle Nico called my mother, who relayed his message. I was wrong about her. Tell her I'm proud. He couldn't quite bring himself to tell me directly, but it was something. 6 months after the Vogue cover, Elowen Merritt Designs had grown from a struggling startup to a respected name in sustainable fashion. We'd moved to a larger studio, hired a small team, and were preparing to launch a collaboration with a major retailer who'd committed to our ethical manufacturing practices. Success changed everything except the whispers. They still existed, but now they were different. Did you see her latest collection? I heard she turned down LVMH. They say she's impossible to work with, so demanding about sustainability. These new whispers didn't hurt. They were the sound of impact. My relationship with Zara had evolved into something I never imagined possible, a partnership built on mutual respect and complementary strengths. She handled the business with ruthless efficiency while I pushed our creative boundaries. We argued constantly, collaborated brilliantly, and somehow managed to remain family through it all. "We're presenting at New York Fashion Week next month," she announced one morning, dropping a coffee on my desk. "Main stage, full runway show." I looked up from my sketches. "That's impossible. We don't have the budget for that." "We do now," she grinned. "The Portugal collection pre-orders funded it entirely. We're doing this, Elle. Planning the show consumed us. I wanted it to be more than clothes on a runway. I wanted it to be a statement about fashion's future, about transformation, about turning whispers into roars." We decided on a theme: echo chamber, a direct reference to the whispers that had followed me for years. The venue was an abandoned factory in Brooklyn, all concrete and steel with natural acoustics that amplified even the softest sounds. The models would walk not to music but to recordings of real whispers, which would gradually build into a crescendo of voices speaking affirmations. 2 weeks before the show, my mother flew in to help. She'd brought something with her, a small, wooden box I recognized from my childhood. Inside were scraps of fabric I'd saved from my earliest designs, notes I'd written about future collections, sketches from when I was barely tall enough to reach a sewing machine. "I thought you might want to incorporate these somehow," she said, "to remember where you started." That night, I stayed late in the studio, examining those childhood artifacts. Among them was a list I'd written at 13, "People who will. Regret being mean when I'm famous." Reading it now made me both laugh and ache for that wounded girl. On impulse, I called Reese, my prom date from all those years ago, now an environmental scientist in Wales. We'd kept in loose contact over the years, occasional messages and professional support from afar. "Do you remember what you said when you saw my bird dress?" I asked when he answered. "That you looked revolutionary," he replied without hesitation. And I was right, wasn't I? "I think I'm finally starting to believe it," I told him. "Would you come to my show? I'm sending you a ticket." The night of the show arrived with the particular electricity that precedes momentous events. Backstage was controlled chaos, models being fitted, makeup artists working their magic, my team executing last-minute adjustments with the precision of a military operation. My mother helped dress the models, her teacher's patience perfect for calming pre-show nerves. Zara ran operations with clipboard efficiency, and I moved between them all, making tiny adjustments that probably only I would notice, feeling strangely calm amid the storm. The guests began to arrive: fashion editors, celebrities, influencers, buyers, and a special section reserved for my personal guests. I spotted Reese, who'd flown in from Wales, Juniper, my college roommate, Dr. Kovich, my professor who'd become a dear friend, and to my surprise, Uncle Nico, looking uncomfortable in a suit but undeniably present. As the lights dimmed and the first whispers began to echo through the space, I felt a hand slip into mine. My mother. "No matter what happens out there," she said, "you've already won." The show was a blur of emotion and imagery. Models moved through the space as the whispers grew louder, each wearing a piece that told part of my story. From Deconstructed, school uniforms representing conformity, to architectural pieces that literally incorporated fragments of my childhood designs. The final look was a gown made entirely of hand-dyed fabric scraps, each piece embroidered with a word that had once been used against me, now transformed into something breathtaking. When I took my bow, the applause was deafening. Not whispers, but a roar of appreciation. Standing there, facing an audience that included people who had once mocked me alongside those who had believed in me from the start, I felt something settle within me. A reconciliation between past and present, between the girl who had been hurt and the woman who had healed. The after party was held in the same space, transformed now with soft lighting and flowing champagne. I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, discussing future collaborations, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. Olivia from Vogue cornered me by the bar. "You've outdone yourself," she said. "The industry is watching. What's next?" It was the question everyone was asking. What was next? More collections, more growth, more success? "Actually," I said, surprising myself with the clarity of my answer, "I'm launching a mentorship program for young designers from marginalized backgrounds who have vision but lack resources." The idea had been forming for months, but speaking it aloud made it real. Fashion saved me. I want to offer that lifeline to others." She nodded approvingly. "Send me the details when you're ready to announce." Later, as the party wound down, I found myself standing with my mother, Zara, and Uncle Nico, in a quiet corner. "I owe you an apology," Uncle Nico said gruffly. "I didn't understand what you were trying to do. I thought you were setting yourself up for failure." "You weren't entirely wrong," I admitted. "The odds were against me." "But you did it anyway," he said. "That's what I didn't understand then. Sometimes you have to do it anyway." As the night ended and the last guest departed, I walked through the empty venue, still echoing with phantom whispers and applause. I thought about all the versions of myself that had led to this moment. The awkward teen in handmade clothes, the determined student, the apprentice struggling to find her voice, the designer fighting for recognition. They had all been necessary. The whispers had been necessary too, pushing me forward when approval might have made me complacent. I found Reese waiting by the exit, his familiar face a bridge between past and present. "Revolutionary," he said simply, gesturing to the space around us. "It turns out," I replied, "that revolution is just evolution with courage." We walked out together into the Brooklyn night, the future unwritten but undeniably mine to shape. The whispers would always be there, changing form as I changed, as the world changed. But now I understood their secret power. Whispers can destroy. You only if you're afraid of your own voice, and I had finally learned to roar.